My name is Chloe Sterling. I'm 23 years old and I just graduated from Boston University with a degree in environmental biochemistry. My parents never approved of my chosen field of study, but they insisted on throwing me an extravagant graduation party regardless. The gesture was bizarre, especially since they had branded me a massive disappointment only a few weeks before. As I stood there, observing the delicate bubbles rise in a flute of expensive champagne, I witnessed my father, Arthur Sterling, discreetly pour a small white powder into my glass when he believed no one was watching. My breath hitched in my chest. My own father was attempting to poison me. If you're listening to this, I'd be interested to know where you're from, so please share in the comments. And I'd appreciate it if you'd like this and subscribe as I recount how I survived my family's treachery and unearthed a strength I never knew I had. To even begin to grasp why my parents would want to inflict harm on their own daughter, you need to understand my family. The Sterlings were not a warm and affectionate unit. We were a corporation. My father, Arthur, had transformed Sterling Biopharma from a humble research lab into a global giant valued in the billions. His reputation for ruthless business tactics was legendary in the pharmaceutical world. Competing companies would suddenly see their funding evaporate or face inexplicable regulatory audits that would stall their work for years. But in public, he was a community pillar, a philanthropist, a devoted family man. My mother, Catherine, came from old money, her family line deeply rooted in pharmaceutical development for generations before she married my father and their companies merged. Her life's mission was to maintain appearances and safeguard the Sterling legacy. Our residence, a cold, minimalist mansion in a Boston suburb, was often showcased in architectural magazines, and she hosted charity galas that were the highlight of the city's social season. Behind those polished exteriors, however, she was a cold, calculating woman whose main form of communication with me was criticism. And then there was my sister, Victoria. 3 years my senior, she was my complete opposite. Perfect grades, captain of the cheerleading squad, and a Harvard Law graduate. She transitioned flawlessly into the family business, rapidly establishing herself as the undisputed heir to the Sterling empire. My parents never missed a single one of her debate competitions or equestrian shows. Her trophies and framed awards were displayed meticulously throughout our home. When she spoke at the dinner table, they absorbed her every word. My own experience was a stark contrast. Despite also being an excellent student, my achievements were consistently met with a disinterested shrug. "That's what's expected of a Sterling," my father would say, without ever looking up from his financial newspaper. When I won the National Science Fair in my sophomore year of high school, my mother's sole remark was that my hair appeared frizzy in the official photo. They only attended my school events when their absence would have been conspicuous and questioned by others. From my childhood, my future was predetermined. I was expected to study pharmaceutical sciences, join Sterling Biopharma, and ultimately lead the research and development department, while Victoria would handle the business and legal aspects. My protests were brushed aside as childish fantasies. When I developed a passionate interest in environmental science, particularly the ecological effects of pharmaceutical waste, my father dismissed it as tree-hugger nonsense. The major conflict erupted during my senior year of high school when I announced my application to Boston University for their acclaimed environmental biochemistry program. The confrontation was explosive. My father threatened to cut me off financially. My mother cried about my betrayal of family duty and tradition, but for the first time, I stood my ground. I contended that I could still make a meaningful contribution to the world, perhaps even more so, without adhering to their rigid plan. After a week of suffocating silence, they finally gave in, but on their own terms. They would pay for my education, but I had to minor in traditional biochemistry and intern at their company during the summers. College offered a glimpse of freedom, but the friction with my family only intensified. Every holiday break was a gauntlet of passive-aggressive comments about my phase and predictions that I would eventually come to my senses. The pressure increased during my last 2 years, with my mother emailing me job descriptions for senior research roles at Sterling Biopharma. When I accepted an internship with an environmental advocacy organization instead, they threatened to withdraw my tuition funding for my final year. I opted to take out student loans rather than forfeit my independence. What they were unaware of, until very recently, was that my maternal grandmother, Margaret, had established a significant inheritance for me. Grandma Margaret had been the sole beacon of support in my family. A brilliant chemist herself, she'd been forced to work in her husband's shadow throughout her career. Before she passed away when I was 17, she made me promise to carve my own path regardless of the opposition. My parents discovered the existence of this inheritance just 3 months before my graduation. Their lawyer had inadvertently mentioned it during a meeting about the company's finances. Victoria later told me our father turned pale with rage. The trust was unbreakable, overseen by independent trustees, and would provide me with complete financial independence the moment I graduated. It was valued at approximately $15 million, money that would revert to my parents as next of kin if I failed to graduate, or if I died before the funds were officially transferred. The months leading up to my graduation were strangely quiet. The constant texts and calls about job interviews at their company stopped. Instead, they became unusually invested in my graduation plans. My mother called, her voice unnaturally sweet, insisting they wanted to throw me a proper celebration, worthy of a Sterling. Their abrupt change in attitude should have been a blaring alarm bell. The morning of my graduation was bright and sunny, a flawless New England day. I stood in my small off-campus apartment, adjusting my cap in the mirror, a confusing blend of pride and dread swirling in my stomach. I had maintained a 4.0 GPA, worked 2 part-time jobs to reduce my loans, and intentionally forged a path away from the suffocating Sterling legacy. I had succeeded. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. "Car service arrives at 9:30. Don't be late." I met my parents outside the commencement hall. My father was already engrossed in his phone, yelling at some employee, while my mother gave my appearance a critical look. "Couldn't you have done something with your hair?" was her greeting. "The photographer will want family portraits later, no congratulations, no sign of pride, just the familiar sting of disapproval." Victoria stood a short distance away, giving me a small, almost apologetic smile. "Chloe." The voice of my best friend, Liam, cut through the tension. He ran over, his own graduation gown flapping, with our other close friend Maya close behind. They were my true family, the one I had chosen. "We did it," Liam shouted, pulling me into a tight hug. He whispered in my ear, "Your parents still look like they just smelled something rotten every time they look at you." "Some things never change," I whispered back, a real smile finally appearing on my face. As my friends and I talked excitedly about the ceremony and our plans to get an apartment together, I saw my parents move away for a quiet, intense conversation. I couldn't hear most of it, but a piece of my father's voice carried over. "We have to solve this problem today before it spirals out of control." My mother nodded grimly, her jaw set. Then she saw me watching. Her expression instantly transformed into a practiced, socialite smile. "Darling, we should go find our seats. The ceremony is about to start." The graduation itself was a blur of long speeches, the endless calling of names, and the profoundly satisfying weight of the diploma in my hand. When Chloe Ann Sterling, summa cum laude, was announced, I could hear Liam and Maya's ridiculously loud cheers from across the auditorium. My parents offered polite, controlled applause, their faces impossible to read. After the ceremony, the car service took us not home, but to the top of a skyscraper hotel downtown, where my parents had rented the entire rooftop terrace for my celebration. The sheer opulence was breathtaking. There were towering ice sculptures, champagne fountains, multiple gourmet food stations, and a string quartet playing softly in a corner. The entire area was adorned with fresh flowers. "Quite the spectacle your parents have arranged," a familiar voice noted. I turned to see Professor Albright, my mentor from the university. He had been my father's research partner years ago before a bitter disagreement led him to academia. He was one of the few connections to my family's world that I actually valued. Congratulations on your remarkable work, Chloe. Thank you, Professor. It's a lot, isn't it? I said. Not really their style, at least not for me. I looked around the crowd, which was filling with unfamiliar faces. Actually, I'm surprised by the guest list. I barely know half of these people. Professor Albright followed my gaze to where my father was deep in conversation with two men in expensive, poorly fitted suits. "Business associates," he murmured. "And over there with your mother, that's Julian Vance, your family's attorney." He leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "Things have been tense at the company. There are rumors of irregularities in some of the recent clinical trials. Your father has been in closed-door meetings for weeks." My stomach tightened. "What kind of irregularities?" He shook his head. "Nothing I can confirm, just whispers." "But be careful, Chloe. Your parents seem..." He paused, looking for the right word. "Particularly invested in preserving the sterling legacy at this moment." As the party moved into full swing, I started to notice how intensely my parents were watching me. It wasn't with pride or even their usual disappointment. It was a cold, calculating stare that made the hair on my arms stand up. Every time I joined a different group, one of them would subtly move to keep me in their line of sight. Victoria came up to me while I was trying to discreetly grab a mini quiche. "Something is really weird," she whispered. "Dad has asked me 3 separate times if you've mentioned your post-graduation plans, and Mom keeps checking her watch like she's on a deadline." Before I could answer, my father tapped a spoon against his glass, calling for attention. "In 15 minutes, we will have a special champagne toast for our graduate," he announced, his corporate smile fixed on his face. "Everyone, please ensure you have a glass for the occasion." I watched as waiters began arranging dozens of flutes on silver trays. My father then motioned to the head waiter, pointing to a specific, ornate bottle of champagne with a gold foil label. "That one," I heard him say clearly, "for the family toast only." With a few minutes to spare, I excused myself to find the restroom. The main one had a long line, so I went down a service corridor toward an employee restroom I had seen earlier. As I neared the corner, I heard sharp, angry whispers. "Are you absolutely certain this is the only way?" It was my mother's voice, strained and high. "Do you want to lose everything we've built?" my father hissed back. "The FDA investigation is gaining traction. If they find those disposal records, we are finished. That trust gives her enough money and power to become a crusading nuisance. What if she decides to go public with what she knows? But drugging her at her own party, Arthur. We could just talk to her again. Talking has never worked with her. She's stubborn, idealistic, and naive. It's just a small dose. Enough to make her violently ill, not to kill her. She'll be hospitalized for a few days, looking like a severe case of food poisoning. It buys us time to manage the paperwork, move some assets before the trust disperses. Julian confirmed that if she's incapacitated and unable to sign, or if she dies before the official transfer next week, the trust reverts to us. "Keep your voice down," my mother snapped. Someone could hear us. My blood turned to ice. I pressed myself against the cool wall, my breathing shallow and uneven. They were going to poison me, my own parents. The idea was so monstrous my mind struggled to process it. But the biochemist in me was already clinically analyzing my father's words. A non-lethal dose of something that would mimic food poisoning but be severe enough for hospitalization. I backed away down the corridor before they could come out, my hands shaking so much I could barely open the door to the main restroom. I stared at my reflection, forcing myself to take deep, even breaths. Years of navigating my family's emotional minefield had taught me how to compartmentalize, but this was a different level of monstrous. Back at the party, I watched with a horrifying new clarity as waiters set up a separate, smaller tray for the family toast. My father personally went to the bar, overseeing the pouring from the special gold-labeled bottle. He hovered over the tray, his eyes tracking one specific glass. I went straight to Liam and Maya, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "I need you to do something for me, and please, no questions," I whispered urgently. Liam, always loyal, nodded immediately. "Anything. Record the toast on your phone. Get my father in the shot as much as possible, especially when he hands me my glass." "Is everything okay?" Maya asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "Just a precaution," I said, forcing a brittle smile. "You know, the usual family drama." The minutes felt like an eternity. My biochemistry training went into overdrive. I mentally reviewed a list of what my father could use. It would have to be something difficult to detect in a standard toxicology screen, something that could plausibly be explained as a natural contaminant or foodborne pathogen. Probably a compound from their own RD labs. I needed to be ready. I needed to recognize the symptoms if his plan succeeded. Nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, dizziness. It could be anything. If I could identify the class of toxin quickly, I could tell the doctors exactly what to look for. As my father called everyone to gather for the toast, I knew with chilling certainty that I needed proof. If I just refused the drink, he would find another way, another time. I needed undeniable evidence of his attempt. The moment of the toast felt like a slow-motion nightmare. Waiters circulated with champagne for the guests, while my father took personal charge of the family's tray. "The family deserves the finest for such a momentous occasion," he announced to the nearby guests. He handed a glass to my mother, then to Victoria. Then he turned to me, extending a single flute, his eyes locking with mine over a smile that was pure poison. I watched, my senses hyper-aware, as he presented the glass. I saw it. A faint, cloudy residue at the bottom, where a powder hadn't quite dissolved in the sparkling liquid. My father's heavy signet ring gleamed as he held the stem, practically pushing the glass into my hand. "To Chloe," he said, his voice ringing with false pride as he raised his own glass. "May your future be everything you deserve." The chilling double meaning hung in the air. I accepted the poisoned glass, my fingers barely touching the stem. "Before we drink," my mother interjected smoothly, "Arthur, why don't you say a few words about our daughter?" My father cleared his throat, shifting into his polished public speaking mode. "Chloe has always been determined," he began, each word carefully chosen to sound like a compliment to outsiders, but dripping with years of disapproval that only I could understand. "While she has chosen an unconventional path, today we celebrate her academic prowess." As he droned on with his backhanded compliments, my mind raced. Liam was recording, his phone angled perfectly. I had to act, and I had to act now. And to Victoria, my father added, surprising everyone, who has shown us all what a true Sterling can accomplish, a perfect example of family loyalty. Victoria smiled a little uncomfortably, clearly thrown by being pulled into what was supposed to be my moment. In that instant, a reckless, desperate plan formed in my mind. "Speaking of my amazing sister," I said, stepping forward with a dazzling smile. "I wouldn't be standing here without her. She deserves a proper toast, too." I turned to Victoria, holding my glass toward her. "This special reserve champagne Father picked out is too good not to share. Here, take mine, Vic," I insist. Before anyone could process what was happening, I had pressed my untouched, poisoned glass into Victoria's hand and smoothly taken her half-sipped, safe glass from her. My father's face froze in a mask of pure horror that he couldn't let anyone see. My mother's knuckles turned white as she gripped her own flute. "To family," I declared, raising Victoria's safe glass and looking directly into my father's eyes. Confusion flickered across Victoria's face, but years of social conditioning kicked in. She smiled and raised the glass I had given her. "To family," she echoed, and took a deep drink from the poisoned champagne. I took a small sip from her original glass, my eyes never leaving my father's. His face had gone ashen. A fine layer of sweat glistened on his forehead as the full gravity of what had just happened crashed down on him. My mother's gaze darted frantically between Victoria, my father, and me, her perfect smile cracking at the edges. The moment passed. The guests applauded, conversations resumed, and the string quartet started playing a lively tune. I began to circulate, making small talk, all while keeping a sliver of my attention fixed on Victoria. Guilt and fear churned in my stomach. I hadn't had time to think, to find another way, but I had just watched my sister drink poison meant for me. The dose was supposed to be non-lethal, according to the conversation I'd overheard. But what if my father had lied to my mother? What if Victoria had a bad reaction? 34 minutes after the toast, it began. I was talking to one of my professors when I heard a gasp from across the terrace. Victoria, who had been chatting with a junior associate from the firm, suddenly stumbled, pressing a hand to her temple. "I feel strange," I heard her murmur. My parents rushed to her side, their faces now filled with genuine panic now that their golden child was the one in distress. My father reached her first, just as her eyes rolled back and she began to mumble incoherently. Her skin had taken on a sickly, grayish hue. "Call an ambulance," my mother shrieked, her carefully constructed composure shattering. Professor Albright was at my side in an instant, his medical knowledge taking over. He knelt and checked Victoria's pulse. "Her heart rate is rapid and irregular," he announced, unbuttoning the collar of her dress. What was she doing right before this? "She just had some champagne," the terrified associate stammered. "She seemed perfectly fine." And then my father's furious eyes snapped to mine, a maelstrom of rage and dawning horror. I met his gaze without flinching. "The ambulance is on its way," someone shouted. 5 minutes out. I knelt beside my sister, taking her limp hand. "Stay with her," I told my parents, my voice firm. "I'll go down to the lobby and direct the paramedics." They nodded distractedly, their entire world now focused on Victoria, who had started to tremble. In the solitude of the descending elevator, I pulled out my phone. I called Liam. "Meet me in the lobby. Now," I commanded. "Bring your phone. It's an emergency." Liam and Maya were there when the doors opened, their faces pale with worry. "Victoria collapsed," I explained, power walking toward the main entrance. "I need you to give a copy of that video to the paramedics. Tell them I suspect she was poisoned, then send a backup to my email." "Poisoned?" Maya repeated, her voice a horrified whisper. "Chloe, what the hell is going on? I'll explain everything later, I promise. Just trust me." The wail of sirens grew louder. When the paramedics rushed in, I intercepted the lead EMT. My sister collapsed upstairs. Symptoms are dizziness, confusion, an irregular heartbeat, and tremors. I have reason to believe she ingested a toxic substance in her champagne. The paramedic gave me a sharp look. "You suspect poisoning? Based on what?" "I'm a biochemistry graduate," I said. The symptoms appeared suddenly about 30 minutes post-ingestion. Before I could finish, my parents burst out of the elevator, with Professor Albright helping them support a semi-conscious Victoria. The paramedics swarmed forward with a gurney, their professional training kicking in. "Please help her," my mother sobbed, her mascara streaking down her face. "She just collapsed for no reason. BP is 90/60 and falling," one paramedic called out. "Pulse is 120 and thready." As they loaded her into the ambulance, my father rounded on me, his voice a low, menacing growl. "What did you do?" "Nothing," I replied, my voice eerily calm. "She drank from my glass, remember? The special champagne you chose just for me." His face twisted with a terrifying mix of rage and fear. "You switched them. Deliberately. You knew." "Knew what, Father?" "That you put something in my drink? Why would I ever think that?" I held his gaze. "Unless you did." "She needs family with her," an EMT interrupted. "One of you can ride along." "I'll go," my mother insisted, scrambling into the back of the ambulance. "We'll follow in the car," my father said, grabbing my arm in a bruising grip. "All of us." The drive to the hospital was a symphony of suffocating silence. My father gripped the wheel, his knuckles white, while I sat in the back, my phone vibrating with a text from Liam. Video sent. It clearly shows you switching glasses. What should I tell the police when they get here? Police? Of course. A suspected poisoning would bring the police. I texted back. Tell them exactly what you saw. Show them the video. The emergency room was a blur of controlled chaos. Victoria had been rushed into a treatment bay, my mother wailing theatrically to any nurse who would listen. I went directly to the charge nurse's station. I need to speak with the doctor treating my sister, Victoria Sterling, immediately. I believe she ingested a toxin, and I may know what class of compound it is. The nurse gave me a skeptical look until I added, I have a degree in biochemistry, specializing in pharmaceutical compounds. Time could be critical. A few minutes later, I was in a small consultation room with Dr. Chen, the attending ER physician. Your sister is exhibiting classic signs of anticholinergic toxicity, she explained. Elevated heart rate, confusion, dilated pupils. We're running a full toxicology panel, but in the meantime, we're treating her symptoms. You need to test specifically for cyclopentolate derivatives, I said, my voice steady. My family's company, Sterling Biopharma, has been developing modified versions of these compounds that won't show up on a standard tox screen. Dr. Chen's eyebrows shot up. That's a very specific suggestion. Why would you suspect that particular class of compound? I took a deep, shuddering breath. Because I believe my father put it in my champagne glass, and my sister drank it by mistake. Her professional mask didn't slip, but she immediately reached for the phone on the wall. I need to contact the police. Within an hour, the ER had become a crime scene. 2 plainclothes detectives were interviewing staff while a uniformed officer stood guard outside Victoria's room. My parents had been separated for questioning. I could hear my mother's loud, indignant protests down the hall, while my father had demanded to speak with his attorney. I sat across from Detective Harding, a calm, serious woman, whose kind eyes didn't quite mask her sharp intelligence. Walk me through it one more time, she said, taking meticulous notes. I told her everything. The overheard conversation, seeing my father tamper with my glass, the split-second decision to switch with Victoria. My training is in biochemistry. I recognize the potential symptoms. I never thought he'd use something lethal, but I couldn't be sure. And why would your parents want to harm you? She asked. Money, I said flatly, and control. My grandmother left me a $15 million trust that activates upon graduation. If I had died before the transfer, it would have reverted to them. They also just found out their company is under a major FDA investigation, and they were afraid I would use my new independence to expose them. Detective Harding's expression remained neutral, but she circled something in her notes. Those are very serious accusations. I know, I whispered. But my friend has a video of the toast. You can see my father hand me that specific glass, and you can see me switch it with my sisters. You can also talk to Professor Albright. He knows about the tension in my family and at the company. A knock on the door interrupted us. Dr. Chen came in holding a tablet. We have the preliminary tox results, she said. We found elevated levels of a modified anticholinergic agent. It's not identical to cyclopentolate, but it's clearly a research compound, not something commercially available. Detective Harding looked from me to the doctor. In English, please. It's a lab-created drug, I explained, my voice hollow. It would cause symptoms that mimic severe food poisoning, but with added cardiovascular and neurological effects. It's exactly the kind of thing Sterling Biopharma has been developing. Only someone with access to their private research labs would have it. Will she be okay? I asked Dr. Chen, my voice cracking. We're administering the antidote now, she replied. Her condition is serious but stable. If we hadn't identified the specific compound this quickly, she could have suffered permanent cardiac damage. Relief washed over me so intensely my head spun. Thank you. When I opened my eyes, Detective Harding was studying me. You realize, by your own admission, you knowingly let your sister drink what you believed to be a poisoned beverage. My stomach plummeted. I didn't know what else to do. I needed proof. I thought it would just make someone sick, not this. I made a split-second decision, a terrible one, and I'll have to live with that. Before she could reply, the door flew open and my father barged in, followed by a flustered officer and a man in a razor-sharp suit. "This is an outrage," my father bellowed. "My daughter is clearly unstable, jealous of her sister's success. She's been making these wild accusations for years." "Mr. Sterling, I need you to step outside," Detective Harding said, her voice dropping to a steely command. "Arthur, do not say another word," the lawyer instructed, placing a restraining hand on my father's arm. "I am Julian Vance, the Sterling family attorney. My clients will have no further comment at this time. Your client isn't under arrest. Yet," Detective Harding said, emphasizing the last word. "But I suggest he cooperates. We have video evidence and a preliminary toxicology report confirming a research-grade pharmaceutical was in his daughter's system." My father's face contorted. "Chloe has always been troubled," he said, his voice suddenly calm and deceptively reasonable. "She was resentful of our expectations, jealous of Victoria. She has threatened to destroy the family business out of pure spite." "That's not true," I cried. "We indulged her little environmental hobby. Despite her duties to the company," he continued, speaking to the detective as if I weren't even there. "We threw this party to show our support, and this is how she repays us? By orchestrating this drama and letting her own sister get sick?" Julian Vance placed a business card on the table. "Detective, we will cooperate. But all further questions go through me. The Sterling family is a pillar of this community. We expect discretion." After they left, Detective Harding picked up the card between two fingers. "Interesting family you have, Miss Sterling." "You have no idea," I said, exhausted. Just then, a commotion in the hallway drew our attention. Professor Albright had arrived and was arguing with the officer outside Victoria's room. "I'm a consulting physician for this family," he insisted. "I need to see her chart." Detective Harding and I stepped out. "Chloe!" "Thank God," Professor Albright said, rushing over. "What on earth happened? They're saying Arthur tried to poison you." Before I could answer, Dr. Chen came out of Victoria's room. "She's asking for you, Chloe. She's groggy, but she's lucid." Entering the dim hospital room, I was hit with a tidal wave of guilt. Victoria looked so small and fragile, hooked up to a web of monitors and IV lines. Her eyes fluttered open as I came closer. "Hey," I said softly, taking her hand. "How are you feeling?" "Like I wrestled a truck and lost," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "They told me. Is it true? Did he really try to poison you?" I could only nod, tears blurring my vision. "I'm so sorry, Vic. You got my glass. I just reacted. I wasn't thinking." "Why?" she breathed, her eyes clouded with pain and confusion. "Why would he do that? The trust from Grandma Margaret and the FDA investigation. He was afraid I'd expose the contamination at the Westford facility." A flicker of understanding dawned in Victoria's eyes. "The sealed reports. The ones on the secure server. I saw them last month. I didn't understand what they were. Heavy metal readings, falsified disposal records. Chloe, they've been dumping toxic research waste directly into the watershed for years." A soft knock on the door interrupted us. It was Detective Harding with another officer. "Ms. Sterling, some new information has come to light. The FBI has had Sterling Biopharma under investigation for the last 6 months for fraud, environmental crimes, and falsifying clinical trial data." I stared at her, stunned. "The FBI, yes. Your parents were already under surveillance. When we contacted them about this incident, they shared their intelligence. They've just executed search warrants on your family's home and offices." Victoria's heart monitor began to beep erratically. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I signed some of those documents. Dad said they were just routine regulatory filings. We'll need to speak with you about that later, Ms. Sterling." The other officer said gently to Victoria, "Right now, just focus on getting better." As they left, Victoria began to sob quietly. I trusted them. I defended them every time you complained about how they treated you. And this whole time, I held her hand tighter. You didn't know. They manipulated both of us, just in different ways. What happens now? She asked, her voice filled with a fear I'd never heard from her before. Now, I said, my own resolve hardening. Now we tell the truth. All of it. The story detonated in the Boston Globe 2 days later. Pharma CEO and wife arrested for attempted murder of daughter. The sub-headlines added, FBI uncovers massive fraud, environmental crimes at Sterling Biopharma. Our family name, once a symbol of success, became an overnight synonym for greed and betrayal. I moved in with Liam and Maya, unable to face the pack of reporters camped outside my apartment. Victoria remained hospitalized for another 4 days before being released into the care of our Aunt Carol, my mother's estranged sister who flew in from Oregon. I always knew your mother was a piece of work, Aunt Carol told me over stale coffee in the hospital cafeteria, but I never imagined this. I should have done more to stay in touch with you girls. The investigation unspooled with terrifying speed. The FBI found a mountain of incriminating evidence. Emails detailed the systematic falsification of safety data for 3 of their major drugs. The environmental tests confirmed what Victoria had seen: years of illegal dumping that had poisoned the groundwater in the communities near their Westford facility. I worked with the authorities, giving them everything I knew. Days blurred into a haze of interviews with detectives, prosecutors, and FBI agents. About a week after the incident, I met with Special Agent Donovan from the FBI. He spread a series of photos across a metal table. Do you recognize this location? The photos showed the inside of a storage unit, filled with boxes of files, several laptops, and most chillingly, vials of chemical compounds in refrigerated containers. Number I've never seen it before. It's a storage unit rented under your name 6 months ago, he said, watching me closely. With a forged signature. A cold dread washed over me. They were setting me up. It appears so, he agreed. We found evidence on your father's computer of multiple contingency plans. The poisoning was Plan C. Plans A and B involved framing you for corporate espionage. In the midst of the legal storm, Victoria and I found each other. With the golden child facade shattered, she was finally able to see the truth of her own manipulation. I was their puppet, she admitted one night. My entire identity was built around being the perfect Sterling daughter. You were also their shield, I pointed out. As long as you were the perfect, obedient one, they could dismiss me as the broken, rebellious one. We hired our own lawyer, a sharp but kind woman named Isabella Rossi, to help us untangle ourselves from our parents' mess. Your grandmother's trust is secure, she assured me. The trustees have expedited the transfer. As for Sterling Biopharma, that's more complicated. I want nothing to do with it, I said immediately. Victoria nodded. Me neither. But we have a responsibility to the employees who did nothing wrong and to the people who were hurt by the contamination. As the summer wore on, the case against our parents became insurmountable. 3 of their top executives flipped, agreeing to testify for reduced sentences. The scale of the environmental disaster was staggering, with cleanup costs estimated in the hundreds of millions. In August, Victoria and I accompanied FBI agents back to our childhood home to identify personal items. Walking through the silent, cavernous rooms was surreal. In my father's study, an agent called me over. He was holding a small, leather-bound journal. Do you recognize this? It was my grandmother Margaret's. The pages were filled with her elegant script, detailing her own research and her growing concerns about the company's ethics decades ago. The final entry, dated just before her death, read, "I have secured Chloe's independence. She alone has the conscience and the strength to break the cycle of this family's poison." Tears streamed down my face. I showed the entry to Victoria. She knew, I whispered. She was protecting me all this time. And you protected me. Victoria replied, her hand finding mine. That's what real family does. 6 months later, I stood on the porch of my grandmother's lake house in Vermont, a property that had been part of my inheritance. The trust had been officially transferred, and the first thing I did was set up a fund for Victoria's ongoing therapy. She had moved in with me a month ago, selling her downtown condo, which was too full of ghosts. "Hot chocolate delivery," Victoria said, emerging from the house with 2 steaming mugs. Perfect timing. I smiled. "I was just thinking about how much has changed." "Everything," she agreed, sinking into the chair beside me. "The prosecutors called. They're offering a plea deal, 20 years for Dad on the attempted murder and environmental charges, 15 for Mom if she testifies against the other executives. They want to know if we object." I stared out at the water. "Do you?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants them to rot, but another part, I just want it to be over." "I know," I said. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Professor Albright. "Job interview went great. They loved your research proposal on bioremediation of pharmaceutical waste. After the dust settled, I had started applying to environmental firms. It felt right, using the knowledge my family's name had afforded me to clean up the mess they had made. Victoria, inspired by the prosecutors who had fought for us, was now studying for the LSATS. The criminal proceedings lumbered on. Our parents accepted the plea deals. We sat in the courtroom as they were sentenced. They looked small and defeated. My mother wept. My father remained stoic, delivering a self-serving statement about his contributions to science, painting himself as the victim. He never once looked at us. As the bailiffs led them away, I didn't feel triumph, just a profound, aching relief. It was over. Outside, Liam, Maya, and Professor Albright were waiting. My chosen family. "How are you?" Liam asked, pulling me into a hug. "Free," I said. And for the first time in my life, it felt true. In the months that followed, Victoria and I continued to heal. We directed the proceeds from our parents' seized assets into a victim compensation fund. I took the job with the remediation firm, and Victoria got into law school. We kept the lake house as our sanctuary. "Do you think you'll ever forgive them?" Victoria asked me one evening as we sat on the dock. I thought for a long time. I don't know if I can forgive them, but I can't let hating them define me. We get to choose who we become. Their blood is in our veins, but their poison doesn't have to be in our hearts. A year after that horrible party, I stood at a podium at an environmental conference. As I spoke about new methods for cleaning up industrial pollution, I saw Victoria in the audience, beaming, recording my speech on her phone. My parents tried to poison me, not just with a chemical, but with a lifetime of control and criticism. But in fighting back, I found my own antidote: purpose, love, and the freedom to define myself. Have you ever had to break free from a toxic family situation? What gave you the strength to move forward? I hope my story is a reminder that you don't owe loyalty to people who try to destroy you, and that sometimes the best families are the ones we build for ourselves. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories of survival and renewal. And remember, the most powerful antidote to any poison is living your truth. Thank you for listening. End of story.